Thank you everyone for joining today. This is the Elm Street Corridor Working Group meeting of December 8th at 3 p.m. I'm Lauren Lind. I am joined by our working group members, Clark Brewer, Tim Davis, Mike Sardina, and Jason Federico. I believe, will be joined also by Chief Sylvia, and Diane Kennedy won't be present. She had a conflict. So with that, I just want to thank you all for your time. I just want to note ahead of time that I have a 3:30 meeting with town council, so I will have to drop off at 3:30, and I'll designate one of you as the host if conversation is persisting at that point. But today, what we're just looking to do is touch base with this group about, we have an upcoming meeting presentation to the select board that'll be taking place at their December 14th meeting. I'm not entirely certain what time we will be on the agenda, but I'll let you all know as soon as I know. And the plan there is to present the findings of phase one in terms of the deliverable that had been outset for this group. And then we'll talk about next steps as we plan to move towards phase two. We do have funding already allocated for phase two, so we will be commencing. And I'd been anticipating receiving a scope of work from Weston and Sampson, but they're just a little backed up, and I haven't had that to date. So I believe that we'll be getting that by the end of today, and I will distribute to the group as soon as I have more on that. I'm anticipating work to start on phase two beginning in January, and that'll take us through what I would anticipate into early spring. And phase two will, as we already know, involve more stakeholder engagement, public forums, and sort of breaking them down section by section so that we can really get into the design level details. As we heard in forum number 3, there's a lot of concern about the configuration of the intersection over on the harbor end. So I know we have more work to do on that. And then in sort of fine tuning the residential section in terms of sidewalk width, there was also some concerns there. So we have more fine grain detail work to do, but that's all to follow in that design phase. And then I'll just note that we are joined today by 2 guests. We have Ralph Dormitzer and Connie Afshar, who have joined us. Ralph had submitted a series of some comments and concerns about the configuration. So before we have a discussion about Ralph's concerns, do any members of the group have any questions for me about next steps or scheduling at this time?
No.
Nope,
All
you
right.
made it clear, Lauren. Thank you.
Great. All right. So then I'll just ask, before we transition, I'll just ask all of you to just mark your calendar for the evening of the 14th for the select board. And like I said, I'll be in touch about timing specifically, but what we'll plan to do is I'll just do a quick introduction, and then we're going to turn it over to Jim to present sort of the process and findings, similar to how it was presented in forum 3 and the feedback that we got at that time. Oh, and Chief Sylvia is joining us now. I'll just note that. So I'll just wait. I'm just going to update Chief on what we just went over quickly. Hi, Chief. You're just joining us. We're here. We're joined by the full working group minus Diane Kennedy is here. And we have 2 guests, Ralph Dormitzer and Connie Afshar. I was just reviewing with everyone the plans for next steps. We will be presenting to the select board at their meeting on the 14th. So if you could mark your calendar, it'd be great to have some attendance there in addition to Jim Reardon and myself. We'll be presenting the deliverables of phase 1. And then I just updated the group that we have funding in place to proceed with phase 2, that I'm anticipating receipt of a scope of work that further details that, and along with a tentative timeline by the end of this week. And I'm anticipating at this point that we're going to begin that work starting in January. That'll take us through early spring.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. All right. Now I'm just going to turn over to, actually, I'll turn it to Tim first, because Tim was the one who brought this to our attention first, that Ralph Dormitzer had reached out with a series of concerns.
Sure. Well, thanks, Lauren, and thank you all. Thank you, Ralph, for your comments, and Connie, nice to have you here. I haven't seen you for how long? So, maybe what we could do is, Ralph, you can perhaps summarize for the committee what your concerns are, and also if you have suggestions on how to perhaps make it a better transition of the various traffic issues that we've got down there.
Well, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Tim. you may have read, I think most of you've read what I have written, so a lot of what I think is there. To maybe put a positive spin on this, so you know that I am positive about doing something on Elm Street. I, in fact, think we should do something on Elm Street. And it does derive from the original widening of the street, which was in like 1973, on which there's quite a bit of history. But out of that widening, there was a consensus that, in fact, the trees that were on the south side of Elm Street should be restored. The street should be narrowed, at least to be more like what it was before 1973. And that was principally it. And so for all of these years, we've been talking about Elm Street. It really was a beautification and a restoration of something like what the street was prior to 1973. The other thing that has occurred since then, of course, is the development of the Cohasset Harbor or Cohasset Hospitality Partners project. What came out of that was a lot of very interesting detail, which would lead you to believe that the current intersection in front of that development, which includes Cove Road, Margin Street, Elm Street, and Border Street, was well done from the beginning. If you go back to that analysis, which was very detailed, everything from the speed limits to the sight lines for people turning to the number of accidents, all were in favor of keeping that intersection as it was. And I can cite those to you if you want. At some point, if you want, if you give me control of the screen, I will do that. But I think it's a little bit detailed to give to you right now. But I'm glad to provide it to anybody who wants it. So what I come out of all of that is, why are we changing that intersection, which actually makes it worse for almost everybody? And let me give you some ideas about what really is worst. Every single car coming down Atlantic Ave and Margin Street, every car coming up from Border Street, every car coming down from Elm Street has to enter now a single intersection instead of it being distributed as it is now among 2 or 3 different intersections. Furthermore, the current alternative to design, as you may or may not know, also includes making Elm Street basically at Fleming's and at Dean and Hamilton one way, requiring Border Street to be one way into Elm Street. So what does that do to us? It means all that traffic on Elm Street first does not even go to Elm Street. It makes a sloping left turn and has to do a right turn on Elm Street after you emerge from Margin Street. When you get down to where Fleming's is, what happens there is that, in fact, you now bypass all of the stores, every one of them, because you can't do a left turn on Border Street. Remember, it's now, Brook Street is now changed to one way. You can't go to French Memories. You can't go to the bank. You can't go to Darlin's. You can't go even to the bagel shop, because you have now bypassed all the parking. I mean, that just makes not a shred of sense to me. I mean, I'm just telling you what this implication is here. Furthermore, if you're coming down Elm Street from Margin Street today, you're not even in the intersection. So at least a third or more of the traffic, and you can look at all this data that has been gathered for Cohasset Hospitality Partners, which shows exactly where the traffic goes. A third of all traffic actually does not ever actually enter that intersection. Now we're causing it to enter that intersection. The same thing applies to traffic coming down Summer Street and then along Border Street and then back onto Margin. That bypasses might bypass it for all practical purposes, all of the intersections. And now you cause that to have to go to an intersection. I just look at it all and I say, how did we get there when in fact the current design works extremely well? There have been 2 accidents over 5 years, one of which was somebody running into a stationary object, and no other accidents over 5 years anywhere in that intersection. I mean, it's kind of remarkable that intersection is successful. Anyway, I could go through it again and again and again. So the bottom line for me is, I'm glad to see something done on Elm Street. I'd like to make sure that the trees and the grass are established certainly on the south side. The sidewalks be adequate, but not ridiculous. I'd like to see some bicycle lane if I could get one. I think that's the right thing to do. And I certainly think that we ought to have regular code-based lanes, particularly for the fire engines and police cars that have to leave that station and travel either south on Elm and or up through Elm to South Main Street. Anyway, you know where I'm coming from. I think I'd be delighted if you let me sort of I'll draw up an intersection if you want me to. But basically, you've got to get that, leave that intersection alone, clean it up, obviously, maybe improve the actual pedestrian crossing at the Legion. That's sort of a rather large and long crossing there. Even the parking there, you're going to have to do something about. There's diagonal parking and an awful lot of parking there on Friday, and that's been eliminated. I don't know how you're going to deal with that, but that has to be dealt with if you change it. But anyway, an awful lot of things say don't if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that's really what it's all about. But Elm Street needs a fixing. Okay, that's all I've got to say. You understand me pretty well.
Thanks, Ralph. I don't think anything is being proposed for the portion of Elm Street down in the village. I think we've talked about that. We talked about making it one way, but I don't think we're doing that.
That's correct.
So
that was the concept that was viewed as one of the options during the process, but it ultimately was decided by this group that, you know, in terms of trying to solve issues, it really created more issues than it solved. So it was taken off the table. So the current recommendation is to improve pedestrian aspects over there, but not to impact the configuration by the village.
And I think additionally, I think what has to happen, this is just me, but we've talked about this, is doing a real townwide parking study to see how we can improve parking, not only in the village and the harbor, but elsewhere in town. And I think that might improve that whole area if we can address the parking issues. But let's get back to the intersection by the Cohasset Harbor Inn. That really is a critical area for this whole thing. First and foremost, one of the things that the Harbor Committee really stressed in the harbor plan was the view corridor down Elm Street to the harbor, and the new building that the Cohasset Hospitality Partners are building will provide for that, and access to the Captain's Walk as well, public access to the Captain's Walk. So those are two critical things. The design of how the traffic flows, we've had a lot of conversation with that. The chief has been quite involved in the discussion of that because of the equipment, the fire equipment, emergency equipment. So with that, I will open it up to anybody else that has a comment about Ralph's concerns.
Well, you know, I'll just jump in. I without having the plan in front of me, it is hard to see what Ralph has in mind. So Ralph, you offered, so I guess I'd say if you have a copy of the plan that you could put some notes on and mark up, that would make it easier to internalize what your comments are. I don't quite understand a restoration of the pre-1970 configuration because I wasn't around then, and I have no idea what that looked like. If there's some pictures of that, that would be probably useful to know. I did see the takings plan in the planning board's archives from back then. I will say in terms of the width of the sidewalk on the south side, I've always said I'd like it to be as wide as possible. I think the last time we talked about it, it was like 8 feet wide. But I could see it being wider, and this is the main element of the kind of connection for the village to the harbor, and having pedestrian activity actually encouraged to make that trek where we all acknowledge that little kids on bikes could use it, as well as the moms with the triple wide strollers. Dads push strollers too. So in terms of that, I don't know what ridiculously wide is, but you know, if it was 12 feet, that'd be okay with me. If it was less than 8 feet, I'd be very troubled. And so just as a general rule, I don't know what the parking counts are for what's existing compared to what's proposed. But anytime you change anything, it affects five things. I mean, it's the unfortunate mess of design. It happens in my business every time something gets changed. It sometimes ruins things. So a kind of fair and balanced approach, and pushing back and at any of the details, I think is fair game. But to the extent that we have to reach consensus, and that's a hybrid of competing interests, that is the most important thing that we work through. Consensus building and understanding what the issues are and the problems, and solving them to the best of our ability as a group, as a team, as a community, as a town, and how they affect the local residents. I don't see a lot of traffic going through this area. Bob, you look out your window every day. I mean, in terms of traffic counts, I don't think we haven't done a traffic count study, but I never see like a backup, or people waiting for people to turn in this particular area. Whenever I'm driving down it, it always seems wide open, and there are very few cars. So I think from that perspective, there's some options that should be on the table, and I'll let somebody else make a comment or two.
Would you like me to
I'll
respond?
speak.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Mike. I don't need to speak.
Hi, Ralph.
Hi.
So there's a couple of things I wanted to just mention that are in support of what Tim said and what Clark was saying. I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit here. The graphic that you're referring to when you talk about there's a grass strip on the north side and none on the south side, that graphic is purely a graphic, and it doesn't really represent what's going to end up happening in reality, because the presumed green strip that shows on the north side actually already exists. And I mean, basically between the back of the sidewalk and the property line, the right of way of the road already exists. It's just colored in. On the other side of the road, it's not colored in yet. So that's sort of a misleading graphic in that respect. The second thing is that the process of dealing with design, as Clark will certainly agree with, is you start with an idea. You represent that idea on paper or a model form or whatever it is, combination of things to generate the concept. The concept being sort of the big ideas, maybe distilled down to a couple of alternatives. And then it goes into the next phases, which Lauren was alluding to, the phase 2, which starts to really test everything that you're basically dealing with in terms of a conceptual idea or ideas. And then after you get through that phase, you get into more specific detail, more the construction drawing phases of the project, and then it goes into construction. That's what basically gets bid. Right now, we're in the conceptual phase. We're ending the conceptual phase. And I would say 90% of every concept that's developed gets modified during the next phase for a whole bunch of reasons, which I don't need to go into. So one of the things about this particular plan that was developed in the concept, it was done basically on aerial photos. It wasn't really done with survey information that had specific dimensional constraints like property lines or like the right-of-way lines for the road. And when you get down into the nitty-gritty, which I have done with stuff that I've received before, there's room for trees on the south side, not necessarily as a big long strip because there's a sidewalk there. There's also, at this point, there's parking the whole length of the road as existing and in the plan. Now, as Clark was talking about, and Tim was talking about, the whole parking thing is a concern and it's an issue that needs to be resolved. However, if you look at the possibility of adding street trees on the south side of the road, if you allow for street trees to be in the same space, the same lane as the parking. At the end of parking bays, in other words, you can get street trees on the south side of the road. You can get them you can get them roughly 40, 45 feet apart, all the way down. Now that still has to be addressed. That's not something you can really determine in an aerial photo. You have to kind of guess at it because not everything is specific and it's not necessarily totally clear in these aerial photos. And I'm not faulting anybody for working on an aerial photo versus a survey, but when you get into the survey side of things, you get much more opportunity to test your ideas and to modify those ideas if it creates advantages that are more palatable to the community. As for the sidewalk width, if we have parking along that side, it makes sense for there to be a sidewalk against the parking. So that leaves those little islands of green space, if you will, at the end of parking bays for the trees. And with the dimensional constraints of 2 lanes of parking offset from the curbs, a parking width of X, a sidewalk width of Y, they're going to end up with a couple of extra feet at least on the south side of additional landscape. Now you can't give all the green back that those folks lost back during the taking because there wasn't any parking then. You take out 8 feet of parking or 9 feet of parking as the current plan shows, you start losing that opportunity. And as I was saying, as you look at this business about the street tree potential, in some of those distances between driveways, no room for a parking space if you have street trees. So some of those bump outs where there was parking can become all green. There won't be a constant dimension all the way down. Anyway, these are just ideas that can be looked at. They're not something that will happen. I can't promise you that. But I know that there's a potential for this. The other thing that was alluded to relative to the strength of the connection between the village center and the harbor, the primary strength, if you will, of that connection, and let's call that connection the yellow brick road. That connection is best on the south side because it almost directly leads to the harbor walk, to the Captain's Walk up by the intersection of Summer Street, which then the Captain's Walk goes all the way to Government Island. And you have a few stations on the Captain's Walk that go around the end of the cove and up to the Oaks. But the intent right now for the Captain's Walk, which is an area that's being surveyed, the intent for the Captain's Walk would be to make it not a 3-foot wide piece of asphalt with a paint line. It would be a curbed area that has a sufficient width, 6 feet, hopefully the minimum, that would take us all the way around the harbor's edge. And that would tie into what we're trying to achieve for those linkages relative to Elm Street. So there will be a sidewalk on both sides of Elm Street. The idea is that the wider sidewalk is on the south side and it ties directly into the harbor. The harbor's Captain's Walk. As you already know, probably the Captain's Walk sweeps at the end of the cove. Cohasset Hospitality Partners is allowing ample space for public access and the Captain's Walk to be at the end of the cove, where currently it's on the outside of the parking lot, which doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think that there's plenty of opportunity for this to be improved. I think it'll be something that the town would be terribly proud of. And when it links into those studies that will occur in the next year regarding the Captain's Walk and the shoreline improvements and all the things that are going to have to come out of that study, it'll start to make a whole lot more sense. As for the intersections, there were a number of alternatives that were looked at. The current one is what is being proposed. It can certainly be altered. There has been some other options thrown on the table since that, but we'll have to just wait and see how this gets reflected in the next phase, which is coming up. And as Lauren has said, there's going to be public input. There's going to certainly be forums again. There's going to be more specific graphics that'll be cleaner and clearer and more subject of throwing darts at than just the concept plan, which is really quite looking at it more from quite an aerial view relative to what is being shown currently.
If I can just jump in real quick, Clark, as far as your thoughts on traffic on Elm Street, it's obviously very much dependent upon time of year and time of day. Daytime in the summer, it is a very busy road. Daytime in the winter, not quite as much. Nighttime, there are times down there, especially during the course of the week, I would say Monday through Thursday, where you can roll up the sidewalks. There's no one to be found. So I think it's very much, determined by, and again, this is not my expertise here. This is just an observation that it is obviously much busier during the daytime in the summer, especially by kids, not just cars and trucks, but everything that's driven by the fact that Cohasset gets busier in the summer, right down to delivery trucks. So that's kind of, I don't know, if we have to do traffic counts, then, the guys and the folks that know this better than I would be the ones to make those comments. As far as the intersections and everything else, I mentioned it the last time we had a public forum. The thought process behind this is, again, observations of a long time working on Elm Street is that people travel too fast on Elm Street. It's just a fact. The straight shot allows for it. When I say the straight shot, once you come over the hill at Brook Street, it is a straight shot all the way to Margin Street. And people just travel too fast because they can. We've already talked about this. The road is too wide. There isn't any deterrence in regards to traffic calming or anything else to get people to slow down. So anything we can do to try and slow people down is what I'm in favor of. Again, I've spoken to Chief Quigley at length, and part of the problem is you can't station a police car there 24/7 to slow people down. So a speed limit is great if people obey it. That's the problem with, as I say, the straight shot to Margin Street. The straight shot to Border Street kind of is the same thing. And what you see there is people, and I hate to say it, but I see the traffic at commuting times. We'll talk about pre-COVID, early in the morning and later in the afternoon. The people that don't want to pay for the extra few dollars to park in North Situate that are coming from Situate drive down Elm Street to get to the parking lot on North Main Street. I'm told it's a difference of dollars per day. So it kind of is driven by that. But that is the other piece of the puzzle, is trying to slow people down that are coming into Elm Street from the Cove. And again, as Chief Quigley has been quoted multiple times, that stop sign in front of, and Ralph knows where this one is, Hamilton Tewksbury's house, is nothing more than a suggestion to some people. They look over their right shoulder and keep right on rolling. So that's just kind of what has been driving the public safety aspect of this, is just how do we calm traffic? How do we allow for, and you mentioned it again, Ralph, how do we allow for access for police and fire? And how can we do all of these things and kind of squeeze it all in and make it as safe as possible? So, that's just a few of my thoughts on that.
That's great. We could contact the county and have them put a meter up. But I also had an idea driving by very, very slowly with all the dug up water line work, that now might be a good time to do 100-foot stretch of paint on the road to see what's proposed might actually look like and feel like. It's like a full-scale model sitting there. But if we put the paint down where we intend to have the various lanes and sidewalks, it might actually help to get to drive feedback for the design of the project. I'd leave it open to Jason to see how that could work.
Can I chip in with a little bit now? First, thank you for asking me to put down some on paper my design. I may be able to do a sketch for you based on the current plan of record, the alternative 2. I'd be delighted to do that. I am very concerned by what I hear, although I respect all of you guys for what you're saying. But a study of enormous consequence was done for the Cohasset Hospitality Partners. And if you would let me share a screen, I will just show you a few of the conclusions, which were extremely detailed as to how many vehicles, how fast were they going, where were they going, at what time of day were they going. Almost every piece of information was done in 2019 that you're saying needs to be repeated. It doesn't need to be repeated. You have it actually on the Cohasset website today, if you want to go look for it. I'd be glad to share you, at least without trying to go into great detail about all this, I'd be glad to share with you exactly what that looks like, because you can have everything you want there, including the fact that they timed all the traffic in that area. And to believe it or not, found it goes between 23 miles per hour on average to 27 or 28 miles per hour on average. So all the data is there. Everything you want to see is there. You don't have to repeat this. It was extremely professional. It's hundreds of pages, actually. But at least the key ones I can show you if you're interested in seeing them, at least as an illustration of what people have done it already to determine what is going on in that intersection. Are you interested? If so, you'll have to share a screen with me.
I would be very interested to see that.
Anybody else? I'll do the share screen. I don't know if it'll work. I'll try, but I won't belabor it. I'm just going to show you what you can find. Okay. Let's see if I can minimize this. Let's see if I can minimize.
Did we lose Lauren?
All right.
Yes, she had.
Why don't we take, okay, I don't know if I can do everything for you, but let me show you what the speed measurements look like to start with. If you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
No.
No, I think the administrator has to set that up for you.
Oh, if she's
just-
left
I
that.
I just
Oh,
made
that
him a
is too bad.
co-host.
But
Jason,
anyway,
you-
I'll read you what it says.
Jason just took care of that. You should be able to share now, Ralph.
Let me go back then to my original screen here with Jason. Okay.
Jason, you're muted.
I know. 'Cause
I'm
I'm
going to do
sitting
I'm
in
gonna
my
do
kitchen.
shares. I'm going to do share screen, Jason.
You
Oh,
should be
there
able
you-
to. I made you a co-host, so you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, I'll go share screen then. Okay, minimize this. Let's go to speed measurements. Can you see that?
No.
Nope.
You still don't see it. It's on my screen, it's not on yours. Let me go back to the original. Try one more time. It says I guess all participants, I guess I'll do that. Who can share? All participants. Advanced sharing options. Gosh, wait.
That's you. You want to just click the button that says
just
share
did.
screen, not the big green one, not the side one.
No, I've just clicked it. Do
Okay.
you see anything on my screen at all now?
No.
Nothing. Share screen is not working.
Because I'll try and share mine because I'm gonna to one point of yours, Ralph, on the lane widths and what the code is. This is Mass DOT standards for local roads is 9 to 12 feet. And then for the I don't know if this one switched over or not, but the City of Boston guidelines are similar. They're down to 9 to 10 feet for local roads. So it's not unheard of to have lane widths less than 10, 12 feet. The goal of that is, as Chief Sylvia said, is traffic calming. By making the lanes narrower, it forces people to slow down. They don't feel comfortable driving at the high rates of speed when the lanes are less wide.
Yeah, you design the roadway for the speed you want people to go.
That's all well and good. can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay. We are a collector road. That's Cunningham Bridge.
It's not a collector road, Ralph. That's a local road. It's not a
Well, how come
collector.
Cunningham Bridge and all of those roads are collector roads and this is not? It's continuing.
But even a collector road can go down to 10 feet wide.
Well,
by
but
that standard.
The point is, it was called a collector road. But anyway, let me go back. If I can't share a screen, I will just tell you what some of these things really say, because I think it really is important to use the data, not opinions on this one, but data. You're talking about traffic calming, but in fact, no actual speeding is shown on any of the data. And the data is quite comprehensive, okay? Again, if you can't see it, I'm sorry, I wish you could. It says I can share on all participants, but it's not sharing. But anyway, let's see if I can get rid of this.
But Ralph, that's the point. That little carrot, don't click the carrot. Click the big part of the green button.
I did. I'll do it one more time, but I have done that repeatedly. I'm not doing the carrot. I'll do it one more time, Jason.
Okay. It'll come up and say, what do you want to share?
So share screen, right? Do you see that one? Do you see my screen?
Nope.
You don't.
Click it. When you click it, Ralph, it should come up and say, what part of your screen do you want to share? Do you want to share the whole screen or one part of your screen? You're clicking the thing that says all participants, host only. That's because you're a host.
I understand this well. I've done this many times. At the present time, I do not have a share screen capability. Just simply don't. Okay.
Ralph, if you want, we could have another working group session. If you want to send the link for that file with your comments in an email, I think that would be fine, and we can pick it up at another discussion, of the working group.
I think that would be a good
outside
thing.
of having the consultant, so we can get your points another way.
The only point I'm trying to make is if we don't use data, if we use opinion, and we talk about traffic calming in that case, or even about lane widths or anything else, if you haven't looked at the data, which was collected for the hospitality partners, which was comprehensive in almost every detail, every car in every direction shown, where it went, where it came from, where it goes to, what speed it went, what the sight lines were. If you made a turn, everything is there. There's not a single thing missing that you need.
Excuse
It
me,
was done in
excuse me, Ralph.
2019. And
Excuse
that
me.
you should read, not have me send it to you. It's right on the website for the town.
Oh, fair enough. Are you trying to make the case where you don't like the roadway configurations? You think that what's there now is fine, except that it should be restored to the 1970s version?
Well, yeah.
Is that basically your point?
Yeah, the point is, yes, the design as it is now works and has no flaws in it by any measure. And simultaneously, I'd love to read to you what the actual 1973 comments were, but it wanted to restore the trees on the south side, had a large green space there, irrespective of whether or not the trees were properly placed or not. And it was clear that has been consistent since I've been here in 1950. Okay, so that design what people wanted has never changed. From the day that the Karsas Cohasset Harbor Inn went in and people were dismayed, they wanted to go back to the green space, they wanted to go back to the trees, and that's what people want and should and still do want today. And we can show you all the data associated with what was said then. We have it all.
I think there is a I think consensus to try to keep things simple whenever possible. But just the intersection at Summer where it bends in, it's such a wide expanse of asphalt. I think that what the consultant has done in particular in that area makes sense. I'm a little bit on the fence on the little dog leg from Margin getting rid of Cove to Elm Street. But I think that could still be worked on to make good sense. But the huge wide expanse over on Summer Street, I just, that's a design that lets cars sweep through. You don't even need a stop sign. You can just sort of drive through and mesh into traffic. That definitely needs attention. But whenever we change something, we affect 5 things. So, I mean, I think your point of keeping things the same, I don't think that's where this is going. But to the extent that we retain the things that work well, and that you advocate for keeping it simple and retaining the things that work well now, I think that's very, very helpful and important that you continue to advocate for.
Could I pose a question, please?
Yeah, go ahead, Connie.
All right, thank you. So I'm very curious as to what's the primary motivation of moving the triangular park in the midst of this area that we're talking about and abutting it to the front of the Cohasset Hospitality Group property. What is the main motivation for moving that and the subsequent removal of that, which would be, or which might be the precursor then to having to change the traffic routes?
I don't think there's any prime motivation for doing that. It basically is how the geometry is worked out to maximize the amount of parking that is available down towards the harbor. The other thing is that basically the geometries relative to turning movements worked out better in that respect. There's also the historic Siemens well, which should not be in the middle of an island. It actually should have more of contact with more public open space, which is, let's call it more contiguous with adjacent uses, as opposed to an island that's ill managed in the middle of 3 roads. So, I mean, the relationship of whether the Elm Street goes straight, as it currently does, and the Cove turns into it, as it currently does, and the leg that connects to Border Street goes away, that creates the triangle. It doesn't even create a triangle anymore. It creates all that open space down the road, as opposed to tying it to the open space systems that are being promoted along the harbor's edge. So, I mean, I think what we're trying to do here is to clean up geometries on the road, as well as the the integration of more meaningful open space being tied to the harbor, as opposed to being leftover space in the middle of the island, or in the middle of the roadways. I would bet my bottom dollar that traffic study that was done for the condos was done at the behest of people who are interested in how is the condo parking and condo traffic going to impact the rest of the roads around here. And that study, as Ralph has said, was done at great expense, I'm sure. And this is typical of lots of projects where these traffic studies are done. And they basically found, as Ralph is saying, that there was no reason for any of these roads to change that would have been impacted by the condo project. Had they found something, the condo project would have had to probably be on the hook for making the proper changes. And that's how it works in the development world. So my guess is that some of the information, the implications of that information may still apply even with revised geometries for intersections. We don't know that. But what they did is they evaluated what is there currently and how it was going to be impacted by traffic coming from and affected by the condo project.
And I would echo, that's my experience as well. The developer wants to put the position together. There's nothing to see here as a part of their project.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm not discounting what the facts in that thing, Ralph. I think that's probably perfectly reasonable and important data that we should all take a look at. I agree with that, but I'm just saying the reason for it to even exist was because somebody wanted to know, the town or whoever wanted to know, how is this going to impact traffic on the rest of the roads?
And we asked for it in the as a part of the planning board special permit.
But it's not there. They don't see it. That's it. Jason is showing it. Yeah. No.
Yeah, I found the study.
Whose screen have we got up right now?
That's mine.
Yeah, those are,
And of note for this, Ralph, as far as speeds are concerned, the speeds are more in the Elm Street stretch that's straight. So you're not gonna see those speeds necessarily in here either. So a lot of
why
the
why don't you
residents
go
on
to
Elm
the-
Street,
Yeah.
like in the 50s, complain about the speed of cars on the street, which that isn't in here.
Well, why don't you go to the actual data where they talk about speeds? Yeah, you got it right there. Right.
All these measurements are at the intersection. And also part of the planning board findings, I think Clark, was they wanted the Cohasset Harbor Hospitality Partners to deal with the impacts of traffic on the intersection as well. And they actually had them set aside money to pay to help do that as part of this process.
Right.
But you don't see in that your own graphic right now, and this is exactly right. This is the document. You do not see the speeds and what you're talking, anyone's talking about. You can't simply say there is speeding when there isn't any. And you can't say that this excludes Elm Street. It doesn't exclude Elm Street. It doesn't say that at all. So,
But the point being, if people are going 30 at a stop sign, that's not a good sign. There's a stop sign there where this 30 mile an hour or 26 mile an hour speed is. So I would think that I don't think that people are going to stop at the stop sign, and that's the issue, is you get continuous speed there.
you know, that's not a good argument. You know, you shouldn't assume that people are not stopping at a stop sign. And just why you can't ignore the data. I'm very concerned when I hear people ignore the data and make another argument. That does not make sense to me. You've got to use the data that's there.
Well, I think
I'm
that's
telling you, the
what she
data
said.
is in a specific intersection and not in the corridor. That's my point.
Ralph, do you accept the fact that this data is very specific to that intersection around the?
Well, bring it back up again. Let's just read what it says. Bring it back up again, Jason. Back up. Okay, it says.
Can I jump in?
It says,
Yeah,
as you can see in
Go
table
ahead,
3,
Bob.
as you can see in table 3, the mean vehicle travel speed along Elm Street in the vicinity of the project site was found to be 26 miles per hour eastbound and 23 miles per hour westbound. Now, what is wrong with that statement?
Mike, if I could just jump in real quick. Okay, this is the observation of a company that was there for a very small period of time. I'd like to know the time of day. I'd like to know the time of the year. I'd like to know everything. I don't see that in this graphic, so it may already be there.
It is
But
there.
what they did was a very small sample of time. My observations are based over 42 years of being on Elm Street, of being a neighbor of Elm Street at 44. So whether they tell you they're speeding on Elm Street or not, the people that live on Elm Street will tell you that people speed on Elm Street. It's something that constantly comes up with the neighbors. How can you slow the traffic on Elm Street? So it's the observation of the people that live there that means something to me, not as much a study that was done for a very small period of time at a specific time of the year or whatever the case may be. So I think the anecdotal evidence from the neighbors is very important as far as what I see, because they're the ones that are going to have to live with what we recommend at the end and what the town decides on the end. It's the people that live there that are going to have to deal with the ramifications of whatever is decided.
And that was also represented in the town-wide survey that was available. That was like the number one concern of people who actually responded to that survey was safety on Elm Street. And that obviously implies either not stopping for stop signs or crosswalks where there's kids or speeding. All those things are part of that general comment about safety on Elm Street.
I still don't think it would hurt to call the county and have them put their traffic count and speed thing down. I don't think it costs any money. It's just a request. They drop their ticker in for a week or two. You could do it this time of year, but really you want to pick it up in May and maybe again in August to get some good solid information.
Well, I hate to say though, the biggest problem right now is the condition of the road. With those
Sure.
trenches there, people
Yeah.
aren't gonna drive as fast as they used to drive down there.
Right, it keeps it nice and slow, so maybe we keep those. But what about the
And potholes.
idea of painting the proposed curb line for 100 feet in the middle there? Maybe
You
even
can do that. You can do that, Clark. And you basically paint the center line, and then you paint the 2 travel lanes, and then a new what would be curb line.
right. I have a brush and some cones I can set up while the paint dries. Do you want to help me?
Especially considering the fact we're gonna at some point it's gonna have to be repaved given the condition of it. So
Yeah.
we don't have to power wash them off and repaint them if we
Right. I don't think it does any harm to have a full scale model.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I mean,
In
it's just a
fact,
cost. I can find out what the cost would be to paint it. It shouldn't be too significant.
In fact, taking a look at what's planned for the Summer Street intersection too, would I think be a big eye opener for people, although that particular area might be more confusing.
Yeah, that would be
Let's-
difficult to mock up.
Right.
Uh,
I think
That would be
you
good.
stick with just doing the lanes down the street and see how people feel.
Right. Yeah, and maybe it could be a part of a short survey that the neighbors can participate in. That survey where they could use their cell phones to access the survey through the SKU on the flyer. That was a great system.
The other piece of that too could be, Mike, part of that, we could even consider doing some of your bump outs in there too, as no parking areas, just to see how people feel about the availability of parking as well.
Are there going to be bike lanes on the street?
No, the bike lane is effectively non-existent at either end of this street. So it doesn't really matter if there's a bike lane in the street. And that's why the sidewalk is wider for the kids. Primarily, basically the folks who are, as Chief Sylvia likes to call them, the spandex crowd, of which he is a proud member, like to stay in the roads. So we don't really need a bike lane because there's no bike lanes at either end, just like there was on the Cunningham Bridge. The state insisted on bike lanes marked on the bridge. The bridge is wider because of that, but there's no bike lanes at either end. Just like there's no sidewalks at either end. But nevertheless, bike lane is.
Connie, just to finish that thought, that was the conversation that we all had about a bike lane. The bike lane to nowhere that would be only a quarter to a half a mile long at the most wouldn't serve the purpose, because then when you get to either Border Street or you get down into the village, there are no, or even Atlantic Ave, there are no bike lanes. So something as simple as sharrows, which are the infamous bike with the arrows, in a travel lane is it just reminds people in cars that the bicycles are going to be on the road. They don't expect them to be on the sidewalk. What we talked about the width of the sidewalk was, again, the observation. It's all anecdotal because I didn't do a study, but the bottom line is the kids ride their bicycles on the sidewalks. As Michael has deemed me, the spandex crowd does not ride on the sidewalk. It's just that simple. Those folks are riding their bikes on Elm Street at anywhere from 15 to 25 miles an hour, which is basically at the speed limit. The kids on the bicycles on the sidewalk aren't doing that. So they're up on the sidewalk to get away from the traffic and to keep the sidewalk wide enough so that somebody can walk down the sidewalk with a bicycle coming the other way was kind of the driver behind how wide do we make the sidewalk. And as Clark has mentioned, maybe it needs to be wide enough for the passing of double wide strollers, so that people don't have to walk out into they don't have to walk out into the roadway so others can pass. So
Right.
some of the things that we talked about when we were talking about how do you use the width that is available on Elm Street to try and satisfy everybody. And then again, that's, Mike does a much better job of explaining that than I do, but it's really, it's a giant group of compromises and trying to get it so that everybody can get behind it is the goal.
Understandable. So just a quick follow-up question. So Tim, in the beginning, you alluded to the harbor walk. So say if you're starting at the village and you're coming down Elm Street towards the harbor, and if you move the park so that it's in front of the development, how does that enhance the harbor walk?
Well, first of all, Connie, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to with the harbor walk. The captain's walk
Oh,
is
sorry.
the walk that goes around on the harbor from essentially from the Oaks to Government Island. What I was referring to is that perhaps is the view corridor, which right now, as you know, as you come down Elm Street, you see a big blank wall. You can't see the harbor from Elm Street. So one of the things that the Harbor Committee in the harbor plan insisted on is that when that building comes down, a view corridor, viewscape, as some people refer to, is maintained so that as you come down Elm Street, you can see the harbor. You see right through the harbor. And that is the current design of the new Cohasset Hospitality Partners building.
That was a no-build easement, view corridor easement that was baked into the zoning bylaw.
Correct, but would all of that be enhanced by having the park now, part of the it seems funny to keep referring it to as Cohasset Hospitality Group, but whatever that is all going to be called, is that going to be markedly enhanced by having the park directly in its front yard?
I don't think that will be enhanced. The view corridor won't be enhanced, but as Mike mentioned, the design of that was the culmination of a lot of discussion about, that included all of the areas that touch it around all around it. That's why it ended up being designed the way it was. It wasn't specifically, nobody said, let's specifically pick it up and move it over and touch it to the Cohasset Harbor Inn. That's just the ultimate. That was what ended up after a lot of discussion about a lot of different design changes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Certainly, I would be very interested in getting a copy of those documents. If either Jason, you can point me to them, or Ralph, point me to them. I'd like to review those.
I can do that.
The studies, and then perhaps what we should do is have another session. We're going to have many of these sessions going into next year. I think this has been very, very helpful, and I really appreciate the input coming from Connie, from you, being a resident of Elm Street, and Ralph, thank you for bringing all of this up. It's very good. I think there's some good ideas here, and hopefully we will continue this conversation. Does anybody else have any other thoughts and comments? And Chief, what are you going to do when you retire? I hope you're going to stay on this committee as a resident of Cohasset. Your expertise is duly noted and appreciated.
Thank you, Tim.
You can't spend 24/7 in spandex, Chief.
There's a lot of truth to that. Yes, I won't argue.
Okay. All right. Any other comments or thoughts? Hi, Jackie. I see you peeking in there.
Hello. The only thing I'd suggest to all of you is read the narrative history of Cohasset, 3rd volume, and take a look at what actually happened and what people wanted to see happen. Okay, that tells you what the history of the whole thing was.
Okay. I think I have a copy of that. If I don't, I know where to find it. All right. Well, thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Have a great holiday, everybody.
Too.